Today I will be discussing what autism is, defined by two of the most common diagnosis manuals used to diagnose autism, as well as look into how both manuals have played into the fighting over what the autism spectrum is, as well as the fighting over some of the labels tied to autism. It is coming up on Autistic with a chance of weather. Welcome back to another episode of Autistic with a Chance of Weather, my weekly video blog on so many aspects of my life as an autistic meteorologist. I'm JP, your host. Today I will be doing my second episode of this Autism Acceptance / Awareness Month by talking about what the two commonly used manuals to diagnose autism have to say about it, such as the criterion, and apply it to some of the fighting that is happening on social media. The most commonly used manual in the US is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders 5th edition, or DSM-5 for short. Now, just recently, the DSM-5 had a revision to the autism category, as there apparently was some confusion regarding one of the areas that has been fixed. The other manual, which is being used outside of the US, is the 11th revision of the International Classification of Diseases, or ICD-11. The ICD-11 actually just recently came into effect on 21st of this year, 2022. There are some differences between the two manuals, as the DSM is published by the American Psychological Association and the ICD-11 by the World Health Organization. Both manuals mention the boundaries with other disabilities such as ADHD, anxiety, schizophrenia, and so on. In addition, both manuals mention in the early pages about how likely it is for autistics to have comorbidities. Some of these comorbidities may also play a factor into the diagnosis, such as apraxia affecting speech, which makes it harder for autistics to make conversations. There are two main categories in the autism diagnosis in both. The first part is that there must be deficits in social communication and social interaction. In the DSM-5, the first part has been updated to include the words of the following, as there are the areas that make up the social communication and interaction component to the diagnosis. These areas are social, emotional reciprocity, such as back and forth conversations, reduced sharing of interest, and not starting conversations. Number 2, nonverbal communications such as eye contact, body language, gestures, and other nonverbal cues. And number 3, developing and growing relationships such as with coworkers or playing at school. The other section of the diagnosis is the behaviors, such as repetitive and restricted behaviors, and they include 1, stimming and other modal movements, objects, and speech like echolalia. Number 2, routines and patterns of behavior of little to no flexibility. Number 3, special interest. Number 4, hyper or undersensitivity to sensory input. According to the DSM, at least 2 of the behaviors and all 3 of the social interaction pieces are required for the diagnosis. However, for the ICD-11, I am reading it as not all of them have to be required. Both manuals do miss out on one area that should go into the behavior section, and that is executive functioning, like budget, meal planning, hygiene, and so on, as many autistics do struggle with it. Now that we know what goes into the diagnosis, I'm going to break down some of the fights on social media actually based on these diagnostic guidelines. The first fight is between the use of the terms high functioning and low functioning, and that autism is linear. Both manuals do not actually use the term functioning label, although although the DSM-5 does have a chart of severity levels in both the communication and behavior, with 3 being labeled very substantial support and 1 being just required support, which is with those who support the functioning labels based on and describe autism as a linear spectrum. However, many autistic advocates believe that the line spectrum is inaccurate and prefer the use of a circle with different slices like a pizza for each of the behaviors and social traits, and determine how close or far from the center their level of support needs in each area are. However, one thing that the manuals do not include regarding the scale is that a number of autistics do have days with the amount of energy to do tasks such as carrying out conversations vary because of how much sleep they got or if they are super anxious, and other areas that would train neurotypical people too. Another issue that is often thought is because of the misconception that autism is more of a childhood disability. This is often misconceived, as both manuals do say that much of the autistic traits are more diagnosable and present as kids, but they also say that some of the traits are manifested later on in life. Another thing to consider is that many of the autistic adults who are active on social media may not have been able to be diagnosed as autistic when younger, as the ICD and DSM both have been revised and updated, especially since the 80s and early 90s, as well as who is being diagnosed as autistic has evolved. Also, there are arguments that autism is underdiagnosed, as a number of autistics of different ethnicities, gender, and age groups may not present as autistic in the social traits area due to masking, which can be quite taxing on energy and draining on mental health, which can lead them to not being diagnosed as often. Could the manuals use another update? Absolutely. Consider the other factors I just mentioned about masking, as it could help ease the fighting on social media about diagnosing autism and who is autistic. However, a number of autistics could find it still too restrictive in mandating all the other social aspects while considering the masking to it. Next week, I will continue my episodes about Autism Acceptance and Awareness Month by going more in depth into some of the traits that I covered in this week's episode. Until then, I will see you next time on Autistic with a Chance of Weather.